All right, so I'm joined today by Mark McDonald. Mark is the founder of FinanceNext, began his career as practitioner in accounting before taking on process optimization at Siemens, and then transitioning to Gartner and eventually your own company at FinanceNext. Thank you for joining. We're going to do something a little bit different than we normally do on these types of webinars, in that I'm going to do a demo of OpenEnvoy as if you are a customer or an opportunity. And because of your background, especially process optimization and AI technology, we can go really deep into some of the technology that underlying the platform. So it's going to be good. We're going to have a lot of Q&A, a lot of back and forth. And yeah, I'm just really excited to have the conversation. I think I want to tee it up first with sort of one of the biggest challenges that customers face today generally in the AP automation space. And then we'll jump into the actual application itself. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we saw in the space, is that the standard operating procedure today, at least in accounts payable, it happens in accounts receivable as well, which is you buy a software package, you spend money on a team to train the software package to learn how to capture documentation, classically the invoice in AP or the statement in AR. Your team makes corrections, and then you review it, and you have an approval process. You link documentation, potentially supporting evidence to it. You map it to a purchase order. Sometimes software does that automatically. It finds a purchase order if it finds a purchase order number. You compare, you sort of sit there and do the stare and compare. You have to make corrections to that, because the bad news is you've purchased machine learning software, but you are in fact the human in the loop. You submit it, you go through this approval process. And the truth is, you wanted to do this for every single line and every single component of spend, every currency fluctuation, every contract. You're basically taking your highest variable costs as a company and you're running through a pipeline where people have to look at it. And they usually have to act on bad data in reality. So what happens oftentimes, 36% of the time, people will approve an invoice. It will go through and it will get paid, even though it's wrong. So we really wanted to solve the problem from scratch, which is we're going to be good enough to look at every single invoice, look at all of its supporting documentation, all of its supporting evidence, eliminate the need for training, eliminate the need for vendor onboarding, which is the single biggest crux. And then at that point, we're going to run the matching process, run the reconciliation. And OpenEnvoy eliminates roughly 80% of the operational labor associated with processing accounts payables on behalf of our customers today. We process around $30 billion in accounts payable in a year, and we've discovered roughly 10% of that was actually overspend that we've blocked, either overspend through duplicate billings or overspend through true overspend, usually unintentional fraud. It's not like suppliers are out there intentionally defrauding their customers. So that's a background on what we do. Average customer size right around 12 billion USD in annual turnover, so a little bit larger than most companies in the space. I'm going to show you exactly how the system works. One of the fun ways to do that is to show you a little bit of our capture product. Our capture product is fairly unique in the space, in that when we started the company, we knew that anybody could ingest an invoice. If you did things like geometry, which is like you draw boxes or somebody draws boxes on your behalf around hotspots in a PDF or an image file. And then
I think you're kind of talking about like the traditional OCR framework.
OCR has been around for a long time. And so when we looked at it originally, we said, well, OCR is actually not accurate enough. It requires a lot of human input, traditional OCR. It doesn't work on flat imagery very well. So you can run into a lot of issues like occlusion issues. And so we needed to have a more sophisticated pipeline to be able to handle not just the extraction of an invoice, but the extraction of upstream documentation as well. So things like contracts, quotes, bids, rate cards, catalogs, all that type of thing. And the secret sauce in OpenEnvoy is not that we can process an invoice with 99.69% accuracy. It's that we can process all the upstream and downstream data as well. The downstream data being bill of lading, shipping instructions, goods received, warehouse receipt. And so we're not just matching invoice to purchase order with standard two-way match. We're matching invoice to purchase order to upstream contractual information to make sure things like tier-based pricing are affected, things of that nature, as well as downstream.
So you're using like more computer vision techniques that read documents. Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. Yes. So our pipeline contains both computer vision, standard sort of neural networks, as well as LLMs for things like translations.
Okay, and then you mentioned something else in there that I found very interesting. You mentioned something about scanning in contracts as well.
That's
So
correct.
we're talking specifically about like AP processing right now. So if you're bringing in the contract, you're comparing these invoices against what's on the contracts. Is that right?
That's correct. So there's sort of two levels to it. Purchase orders are often created at companies to define what the contractual terms were, and then to set a boundary for what that vendor is allowed to charge you. So you might get things like $1 million contract, but you're going to get progress billings against that contract, which are structured into a purchase order and get drawn down over time and then placed in the ERP and paid. And so what ends up happening is the legal definition of your working relationship with the customer is actually contract. And so what we can do is, instead of making your accounts payable person become an expert in that contractual language, our system is actually an expert in that contractual language. You can run the match and to see even if if the contract matches the purchase order. And oftentimes there are amendments as well that came in through email, and appendices as an example for construction projects and
So,
whatnot.
so instead of just comparing an inbound invoice to your purchase order and some goods receipt or a service receipt type of activity, you're also comparing it against the original contract. That's valuable, right? Because like the way I see that is there's a lot of the time procurement negotiates that contract and then once a year they audit it, make sure it happens, or you're waiting for people just to kind of manually
Yeah.
double check and see that the purchase order matches what's in the contractual terms. So that's pretty notable, I'd say.
Yeah, we did that because our first customers were fairly large manufacturing firms. And so
Yeah.
you would have not just contract, but you have a BOM as well. And so you actually have to take the bill of materials and ensure that every invoice line item matches up with the bill of materials. And so it can't just be like a contract in like a Word doc. It has to be something that's executed, and it also has to be something that matches to the BOM in that particular example. But it can work for freight as well, where you have a freight rate card and then that matches to amendments that get adjusted, price and things like that, and then all the downstream work. One of the things that we discovered when we were running that match is that customers know two-way and three-way match, but there's actually no place in ERPs for this style of in-way match that we run. And that match goes clear down to the goods received. So it's very common to get a warehouse receipt that doesn't match the packing list.
So N-way match is a pretty valuable way of looking at that. So there's another thing that you just mentioned there that I think somebody listening might be interested in hearing is that you're doing then, it sounds like line item type of matching, not just like in total, right? That's a big requirement for a lot of, especially manufacturing organizations.
That's correct.
So you've got partial payment type of partial delivery and partial payment type of situations you're taking care of.
Yeah, it's often the case where a customer will get an invoice, which is for partial delivery as well. So the BOM will need 25% of the payment up front, and then an additional 50% when it's in the water, and an additional 25% when it's landed. And
Well, those are contract terms.
That's correct. And so what happens is we also have to generate accruals based on that. Classically, I, being the customer, need to have my vendor insert all that data into a vendor portal in order for them to get paid. And then you have what's classically called vendor portal adoption problems, where is the contractor, the subcontractor, the vendor, supplier, the offshore manufacturer is just large enough to where they say, no, I'm not going to use your vendor portal. So what we do is we're able to take that, stabilize it, normalize it over time, and then match it against the BOM to make sure at a line item level, you are getting the goods that you actually paid for, making sure the SKUs match up and everything like that as well. I'm going to give you an example of how we get line item level detail, right, without asking a vendor for it. So I'm going to upload an insurance invoice.
Yeah.
This is actually not pre-trained, so we haven't sent in. This is our actual insurance for OpenEnvoy. So that is an untrained, fully from scratch invoice being processed down to the line item level. And there's a couple of things that happen here. You mentioned earlier, like traditional OCR doesn't really work. Well, traditional OCR just requires a lot of input. And so our goal at the company is to eliminate input where possible. So the first piece that OCR tends to have a challenge with is tabular data. It has a challenge with handwritten signatures as well, which we can get into. But it has a challenge with tabular data and retaining all the tabular information in context. So right here, we've pulled out all of the requirements. We pulled out all the prepayment rates, actually, surplus, the premium, the fact that we did get a discount because we paid in advance for the thing. We have tabular data.
Let me ask a couple questions about those on the fields. So if I understood you correctly, you did not need to train this to do that. That comes out of the box.
That's correct.
So on day one, anybody who's implementing this The OpenEnvoy platform can start scanning in invoices and it will parse these fields.
That's correct. In fact, our QuickBooks customers who sign up via QuickBooks just start doing it automatically self-serve day one.
The fields that are listed here, is it taking every discernible field that it can see from the invoice, or can I ask it to like pull certain ones out?
So number one is it by default takes everything on the invoice. And so it even takes the descriptive language and using our own processing goes into the descriptive language, reads the descriptive language and figures out if there's additional terms in the description, because sometimes there's like bank account data or there's an LLC number. So we take the NPM number as an example. You might only want to use a subset because maybe you have overriding terms in the MSA or whatever it may be. But by default, it captures 100% of every document that is submitted to the system. And then, so what you can see actually at the tabular level is you can see all of the line items. You can see the loan duration. If there is a loan on this one, we actually pay ourselves right away, but you can see all of those terms. And then you can make sure, like I said, later on, you make sure that they actually charge you the correct amount when you pay the correct amount. So this gives all the banking information, bank details. And what's nice about this is we use all of this information right now. Number one is we make sure that the bank account information hasn't changed since the last time that you paid this vendor. Number two, we make sure the bank account information either matches or is confirmed to be updated by our customer. So our customer can actually see it. If it has been changed, it goes through a resolution process and we match it against their vendor master data. So you might have a vendor master file, it might be an Oracle parties table, it could be anything, but it matches against the underlying ERP's data for that vendor and then resolves any discrepancies at that point. The first is we make sure that this is not in fact a duplicate. And our duplicate detection is pretty extreme. So it goes through the following stages. First, you have your standard hash level duplication. Like, is this exactly the same PDF that everybody on the email thread has been talking about, right? We look at the metadata of the invoice and determine whether or not it's duplicate based on all the metadata. So that's if there's a purchase order number, date ranges, things like that. And then we go down to the line item level. Oftentimes what happens is a customer will pay their vendor. The vendor will recognize that on a different cycle than the customer paid. The vendor will then send a cumulative billing the next time because they have not applied cash for the previously paid invoices. And then you will have duplicated line items, not duplicative invoices. So we actually detect duplicative line items. And that way you only ever pay what you owe, irrespective of the vendor's close process. And so we make sure that you're paying only the line items. We also do a search on every single previous line item you've ever paid that vendor to make sure the match is for the date window of the services that were valid, or you would get this where the freight billings as an example, you get a time window, these types of things, right? So make sure you're only ever matching and reconciling and paying, most importantly, the line items that are correct, which is why we have this concept of verified payments. We verify down to the line item.
So I'm trying to think here based on all the things that you told me. My initial question is how does this happen then for like non-PO based invoices, often like service type invoices? But
yeah.
I don't, does that get handled differently? It sounds to me like what you described would catch those things, but are there any additional checks on those?
Yes. So there's a couple of things there. So if there is a purchase order, by the way, for a large portion of our customers' invoices, there are not purchase orders or they're not like one-for-one purchase orders.
The
so
stats on that are quite shocking, actually. It's about 50% of all purchase orders are non-PO. I don't know if that's what you're seeing. Recently ran into that statistic. I was pretty shocked.
I think that makes sense for a variety of reasons. I think the first part is vendor portal adoption is horrible. I think it's like 7 to 13%, depending on who you ask. So it's pretty bad, in which case the purchase orders don't get associated with like an easily created vendor master file. And then of course, like the employees now have to create and set up vendors. And so you do get that challenge of like, okay, well, I had to buy this thing, but it's non-PO spend. And so OpenEnvoy was started with the attitude that we can never rely on a PO existing. In reality, we have to treat everything like no purchase order exists. And if one exists, lucky strike,
it's a bonus.
So in fact, there are a lot of checks that occur and there's a lot of resolution that has to be done if, of course, like an account number changed or a routing number changed or something like that, which you do see in a lot of instances. So yeah, we definitely have to handle that, but we handled it from day one with the expectation that no purchase order exists.
Okay, cool.
So not only day one can they start ingesting invoices, but that took around a couple hundred milliseconds pre-rendering to the page. And so The uniqueness, going back to that I talked about earlier, is that we can take all of your upfront documentation, all your downstream documentation. We can just simply take that off of your email, so you don't have to upload anything manually ever. We're managing a large parts catalog or a rate card or whatever it is inside of the system to be able to match against anyways. But the point is, your team as the customer never has to make manual updates, and you never have to ask your vendor to participate in order to run a complete end-to-end AP match. We do all of that entire process. Our average right now is like a couple of seconds on that entire process, which now means that you're able to verify everything before you pay. And that's the real benefit. Your time to value is incredibly fast, and you're able to realize that every payment is completely verified before you pay. You never have to beg your vendors for their money back.
So that's it. Another statistic that I recently did for something else I did is that a lot of POs, you doing them the old fashioned way, take up to 15 days to process, which isn't like totally unreasonable, right? So you're talking about taking that down into like, I'll call it minutes. You called it milliseconds. Minutes is fine with me. Even a day is fine. But what's interesting about that is that if you're talking about 15 days, there are some payment discount terms that you'll never have a chance of capturing. I mean, the famous 210 net 30, I don't know who offers that anymore.
That's
but
right.
You will never even have an opportunity to do that. You won't process the invoice until the terms have already expired. So
That's correct.
it sounds to me like there's an opportunity there to take advantage of some discounts you couldn't before.
People a lot of times say, well, why do you have to be so fast? And the reason we have to be so fast is because the standard operating procedure in the market today is run absolutely up into the window where you have to pay, cut a check, and get an extra 4 days of float. And so what you want as a customer to optimize the amount of float that you're earning in your account, but you also want to make sure you're not a consistent late payer. We found that 60% of our customers' invoices have early pay discounts, but they weren't taking advantage of the early pay discounts. Even if the early pay discount is like 3 to 5%, that's still massive, right? And they're not taking advantage of it because you've asked your AP clerk, of which there's a ton of turnover. So we automatically make sure that our customers get paid before we pay out and do things like that as well. We set that up to where accruals are generated automatically. We manage the amount of float in our customer account before issuing the payment. And I think that's it, when you have a system doing what a system should do and people doing what they should do, which is resolving problems, resolving actual challenges, not looking at every single invoice to find out if there is a challenge, but resolving those challenges. And you can have more expertise around that within the department, which is super important.
Interesting point. So you're basically saying that by using a process like this, you could reshore a lot of your work and save money there, but also save money by taking advantage of discounts.
That's correct.
But like, it sounds to me like basically what you're doing here is like every single payment is kind of going through like a quasi audit before you pay it. As a matter of fact, some audits might not even go into that level of detail, but this is not done just on select transactions. You're doing this on every single transaction. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Classically, as you know from your consulting days, the audit, the way that financial audit works is at the end of the year, they do what's called vendor scoring. Most firms do what's called a scoring model. And you take a percentage. And even large companies do this today on a monthly basis. They take a small number of their vendors and they put a magnifying glass up to what the vendors are billing. And you tend to find that a vendor is maybe overbilling you, whatever, 8% of the time or something like that, right? But you can't possibly deploy enough human labor. It's literally not possible without destroying the gross margins as a company to deploy enough human labor at a large $10+ billion company to look at every single line item, every single detail. And then it's also pretty inappropriate to ask everyone at the company to remember all previously paid invoices, right? Because it's not like your ERP has it fully auditable. And so that's absolutely correct. In fact, we call it an audit in certain verticals. So in the freight world, it's called a freight audit. The thing about a freight audit that happens though, is it's after the fact. And so with OpenEnvoy, it happens in real time before you're even notified that you received an invoice. It's happened. And you're only ever notified with OpenEnvoy if there is fraud, if there is an overbilling, or there's a compliance reason why you need to look at it, say that it's over $75,000 minimum threshold and spend or something like that. A human needs to approve it. But that's the only time you even see them with
So this is kind of like exception-based processing. Can you set thresholds on those things, like when you want something to kick out, or does the system decide that on its own?
You both technically that you have full control over thresholds and tolerance levels that you're willing to set up to approve invoices.
But while we're on the auditability thing, so although you have like a certain amount of diligence that's being done before you make the payment, you're still going to get audited, right? Well, you will still go through a year-end audit. So how are you're tracking all of this somehow so that I can provide evidence to an auditor? Is there some capability there that you can rely on?
That's correct. Sadly, we cannot get rid of your annual public audit if you're a public company, but we can reduce its cost considerably. In fact, for our customers, we do reduce its cost considerably because what's effectively happened is every single component of spend has been fully verified before you ever made a payment. And so we track every single component of that. And so we go in much more detail than an auditor. An auditor is going to look at compliance and controls to make sure you have the right people in the right stage for every threshold of spend. Spend over $250,000 went to a senior executive, spend over 75 went to the manager, right? Everybody's seen those sorts of standard operating procedures, right? What we do is we enforce them so people can't access outside of the system because OpenEnvoy is getting the emails before a human does. We're getting the EDI messages, we're getting the SFTP uploads, we're getting all of that before a person's even notified. So we enforce those policies, which is super important. So if a customer comes to us and they have policy, but it's not well enforced because it's manual across multiple systems, maybe they're a large company and they have multiple ERPs, you immediately get an operating procedure baked into the system. And then you can tweak it to your organization's needs, of course. And there's a ton we do on that, especially around GL coding, as you might imagine. And that's all taken care of in the system. And then you have full traceability of everything any person or system has ever done to that invoice. And I'm going to show you what that looks like for full traceability. So here, we're being bothered about a couple of conflicts come up in this particular invoice. So there's a few things that we've done. Once we process the invoice, number one, you have all the tagging that happened or all the capture that happened recently. You have every single line item, you have every single element. Those have all been set up here, tested, and they've been mapped to your vendor master file. So one of the challenges that you might get is a logo like this that comes in. And maybe this doesn't exist down here, but you only have a logo up here and it's not doesn't have a name. We actually extract from logos as well. So we extract that information. Super important because with some firms, they have regional logos and regional billing. And the only way to get that information about who that vendor is actually in the logo. So we're able to recognize that as well as part of this. The next thing that happens is we go and we look for API data from our customer. Is there a purchase order? What does the purchase order say? And then we show what the conflict is and where the conflict occurs. Well, on this one, it was for aluminum or aluminum. And you have the invoice right here. It shows that the quantity and the unit price, and the unit price is slightly different. This is the commodity that is traded. So the unit prices actually do matter considerably, right? Especially in the volumes that they come in at. And then it goes through the rest of the line and says, well, these are already matched. You don't really have to worry about those. You can see them if you want to, but they're already matched. It shows you discounts out of this, everything else that would be in the line item. But the really interesting thing, once you have the data, you should be able to perform a match, right? Really interesting thing is this might be many to many, which is actually the audit problem that you run into. Oftentimes you have one purchase order, many invoices against one purchase order. You may actually have one invoice, normal. One invoice might also be associated with many purchase orders, many contracts, because they just do cumulative invoices. So we're able to handle many to many automatically. And part of the reason we're able to handle that, part of it, is because we have a really advanced data labeling system. So when this comes in, the traditional data labels are, I want to assign my GL code. Maybe I assign it to this company, this vendor. Maybe I assign it to the vendor plus the region. And so you can get down into really specific levels.
You set up that account determination in OpenEnvoy.
That's correct. But what's nice about it is self-serve in the sense that the customer can say, oh, you know what? Actually, this isn't just an automated label. Of course, this is like aluminum, zinc, copper, so it's commodity trade. But maybe I want to recognize it as African export commodities. I want to say my Incoterms on this deal for the contract are a little bit different because we've received them. You can simply add those labels here. And then the rest of the system uses those labels for workflow. And all of the workflows, since you asked about auditability, because those auditors are really at the end of the day making sure you have compliance and control set up, not just for thresholds, but also for workflow, like who does what, right? You need team-based assignments, you need individual-based assignments.
So are these these are tags that come in, then they're assigned by a person?
They're assigned by the system automatically for certain types of things. So for the classic nouns, like what type of invoice is this? Which region is this vendor from? All
okay.
of those types of things, like what types of products are they? Are they commodity products versus raw commodities versus manufactured goods, whatever, electronics? All of that type of thing is completely automated. But then you have the ability to add user-defined tags, which are something that may be personal to you. And then the reporting can use all of those tags as well. So then you get your view of your world. Right?
So these tags then, so they can be system assigned or they can be user assigned.
So if you have a line item that's really complicated here, we just say a limit on rights, a limit of bulk is pretty straightforward. But if you have a line item that's really, really complicated, and has different weights and measurements, and has maybe that's this power line item versus break bulk line item or whatever, all of those types of things would get assigned as well as labels. And then, of course, the GL codes. So oftentimes, a lot of systems in this space allow you to code at an invoice level. The problem is the line items will contain freight, they'll contain the commodity, they'll contain the manufactured product, services rendered. And so the GL coding system that we've built, which is fully trained, fully machined, asserts the GL codes depending on the type of line item that it is based on the product that is defined in that line item. And then we match that line item back to the contract, the quote, the bid, the purchase order, and then we make sure that this is in fact the correct product against any of those documents or the latest of those documents. So this particular conflict, it looks like a weights and measures conflict. So the unit price is in the wrong precision. So what it shows is the invoice, which we clicked on earlier, differs from the API data. But the truth is companies now have a lot of sophistication, and if they could take the time, they would look at public indices for the commodity price, look at what their contract price should have been if they have variable costs. And so what we actually do is we make callouts to third-party APIs and first-party APIs, depending on that customer and the style of enrichment they would like. One of our customers uses tide depth of the Mississippi River in order to assert whether or not an invoice is valid. And so you actually have to use that in part of their pricing component. So we recreate what their pricing should have been based on that index for that point in time. Currency is super straightforward for us to do. We've done currency since day one. We do really complicated work around that. And that's the spot price at the moment in time, unless it was contracted separately. We do currency lookups from their ERP tables. We do tax this way as well, because sometimes you'll have variable tax. You might have standard VAT that you have to pay on imports. Maybe you also have a special relationship with the government. Our customers are much larger and they tend to have sort of special tax breaks and tax incentives. And so we match against those tax incentives as well. That's very important on customs filing forms.
So this line item, it was described. So now I understand what it means here when it says API data. This is based on data that is independently verified for commodity type things. Right. So this wouldn't happen for every single invoice where that doesn't apply. But in this case, the contract is tied to some type of commodity based pricing. And that's why then that's what that API means.
That's correct. Yeah. One of our, and a lot of times people say, okay, well, this is amazing, but will this work on the languages that we work in? I think we work on, 244 languages across 160 countries currently today. So we're pretty expansive on this, resolve back to English, normalize back to English.
So you can scan the invoice all the way back to that original invoice scan. You can scan that in a foreign language and it'll translate it.
That's correct. So it does the translations, or it'll match them even untranslated. So you might need to match them untranslated if they have like customs filing forms, and also maybe the teams in China that's actually doing that. I think, yes, we're doing this at a line item level, but it goes much deeper in terms of the language. My favorite thing there is I think it's a couple $1 million or more a day in handwritten Hindi invoices for clarified butter in northern India, as an example. And so, so those receipts look obviously less structured than the invoice that I showed you earlier.
And it's something to point out here too. It's something that OCR doesn't do. Back to that original topic, right? This is one of the advantages of using more AI-based deep learning computer vision techniques. to do this.
And then I think also the translation around the field naming and things like that. So now this gets you here. This is what, as an AP clerk, you would look at this and you would say, okay, I'm going to start a dispute, or I'm going to provide additional evidence that there was a currency price adjustment that was okayed, or whatever it may be. You can start that dispute. And yes, we have next buttons like everyone else. You can go through the process and dispute and send it back to the vendor. The thing that's interesting about this for OpenEnvoy is it can assign to teams or individuals, and it can do that based on any of the tags or labels that you set up for that vendor. So it could assign it to Jeannie in New Jersey when it's a vendor that sends in specifically this style of product or specifically this region. So you can get very detailed on that. Technically, it happens automatically, but the admin at our customer can decide how they want to route it in their organization. I mean, it could be an approval to, like I said, to a specific region down to a specific person. That usually gets set up by the vendor type at an admin level, and it's not really down to the AP clerk. When the AP clerk hits next, they know that, okay, this is a mistake. It's a mistake on our end or a mistake on the customer's end. I'm going to log why that was a mistake. But to your point earlier about the auditability, it's very important that we know exactly who did what every single moment of time, which means part of the challenges in the certainly in the LLM space, right, is that you have these sort of takes and hallucinations, to your question, right, around auditability and traceability. The challenge is, number one, is if the invoice is too long, the long running agent will start to hallucinate and start to lose its context. Right around 67 pages is what we found. And so we don't use that system for that type of problem, right? So instead, what we do is we specify every single aspect of exactly what happened, exactly what OpenEnvoy chose to do, exactly what the customer wanted to do. We have confidence scoring around all of this. But by the time you see it, we guarantee the confidence actually for our customer. So it goes through every little piece. And this is really important. If you see someone on the admin side change the threshold or change the tolerance for a specific vendor, you have a place to look from an audit perspective as to what's going on. That may be completely valid behavior that was approved by management outside of our purview, but we actually track everything that both the machine and the humans are doing as part of this process, which is really important from an audit perspective.
You said a couple things there that kind of caught my attention. One, you mentioned that there's confidence thresholds or confidence levels that are reported. So that kind of tells me that these things are being done with like more machine learning techniques rather than using like an LLM to drive the work.
Yeah, you can still get confidence scoring out of LLMs, of course, but the way that you do it is like you test differently, right? Or you test multiple LLMs to do that, or you run multiple agents against each other. We're not really doing that. So our pipeline is mostly, classic ML up to the point of the neural net, where neural nets, when it came to language, got a lot better in LLMs, in fact. And so we use LLM for translation and things like that as an example. But there's still confidence scoring that is we can't provide to our customers. The funny thing about confidence scoring a little bit for OpenEnvoy is that we guarantee an accuracy level for our customers. And so it's sort of a moot point. By the time they see it, we're not showing them we're 60% confident in something. We're saying, no, this is accurate.
Yeah.
And that's because we trained what's called a conservative model. And a conservative model is willing to accept fewer false positives, but trends towards true positive at an expense of testing. So usually it's a cost problem. And so what OpenEnvoy did is we figured out how to do that for a reasonable cost to make sure we still fall on the bandwidths of, it costs less than an LLM as an example, but we provided greater accuracy. I think most LLMs come in around 90-ish% accuracy, and we hit 99.69% midpoint on an ROC curve for the more technical ones.
So you mentioned that you use like an agentic structure in the back end to do this. Did I get that correct? And that's correct. That's within your platform.
That's right. We do expose it to customers. So in reality, we have a couple of APIs where we expose MCP style services for our customers. So there are agents in the background. The actual pipeline is managed by agents. The AP matching process is managed agents, but then also with rules override, because you might get these very explicit things like cheddar cheese price index or something, from an OTC market. So we have to be able to handle those types of things. But yes, we do both. And so what you're actually looking at is the result of agents running in the background.
So the agents running internally to your platform are kind of transparent to anybody who's using the platform. But you mentioned that you've got like some APIs that are exposed externally. So in other words, there are services that your platform provides that can be accessed from outside of your platform.
Purchase order drawdowns, accrual generation, because we do real-time accrual generation. We do purchase order drawdown in like a procurement system, like any of the major procurement tools, as well as retroactive GL coding on previous invoices, on customers ERP. We do a number of things. Like we'll do retroactive is actually really big. So when a customer comes on board, we do offer the service to look at previous invoices to make sure they're coded correctly. This is one thing that one of our customers found. Initially, they thought we missed four, or we had four mistakes. And in fact, what we were showing them was four invoices that have been encoded incorrectly for the past 20 years with regards to taxes. And so those are the types of agents that we've built to deploy into our customers. And so they can fill, their Snowflake instances and things like that. I mean, our customers obviously use like large BI tools. And so we want to make sure we get as much data as possible into those BI tools for the customers so that they can run their own analysis.
That's like a reporting, but there's some type of an interface with like ERPs as well.
Yeah, so we do, that's all direct. That's not report, that's direct. And so it's direct connections that we offer for all of the ERPs, as well as the BI reporting tools. We'll even do things like export Parquet documents, Parquet files, if you're familiar with that format, to load these BI tools, right?
The ERP interface is something else, right? So this isn't like OpenEnvoy doesn't stand here on an island alone. It needs to communicate back to a system of record.
Number one is when you sign up for the product, if you have one of the ERPs that we support on a self-serve basis, you can go down here to integrations. You can connect to any of the major ERPs here. So self-serve connection, and NetSuite is an example. It'll automatically up and running quickly. It'll pull in all your geocodes, pull in your vendor master data, do a two-way sync. All that's handled automatically. We have a separate VPN tunnel that we use for those customers, and then we have direct access to their Oracle instance. And we have a wrapper that we've built for Oracle specifically, or for SAP, older versions of SAP, ACC, or previous. So we have different connectors depending on the type of ERP it is, but that's all handled here. And then we have API keys, and those API keys can be used for everything from Claude MCP server to direct access API, fully open API. So literally all of your data is your data. You can use it however you like. You can even do static IP whitelisting here, which is what this component is. We show you exactly how to do it. And so this allows us to integrate with everything from one instance of some old system that you have laying around that's been there since the dark ages to all the other ERPs you have. So our customers often have 3, 4 ERPs that need to be connected, collated, and then managed in a single instance of OpenEnvoy.
Yeah, and that's a good point back to the duplicate invoices as well. It's like you have to, to truly avoid duplicates, you need to kind of manage that across all those systems. Explain what you can do with that interface.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, you have to be a little bit careful as a customer, honestly, on that. But we give you the sandbox to play in, certainly. You have to be a little bit careful as a customer, though, because you have to think about how those systems work and how those agents work, and then also how LLMs work, right? LLMs tend not to be great at this style of math that we need, right? But yes, so the system does, in fact, have a way of connecting. We have MCPs for all the agents that we currently support in the product. If you wanted, with our API, it is theoretically possible to rebuild all of OpenEnvoy using our API and connecting it to your various sources. So we give all the all the low-level agent data is also actionable as well. The thing that's proprietary is the pipeline, of course, but beyond the pipeline and beyond the matching system, the customers can connect directly with each of these components.
If anybody's listening to this, I just want to make a point here on that, is that just because there is an agent, it doesn't mean that that agent is exposed and readily available. You have to enable it, and you have to specifically enable it for every single Claude client. So it's not inherently a vulnerability unless you create the vulnerability purposefully.
We do maintain permissioning as well. Our goal of the company was to have as little of an interface as possible. I saw earlier was the sum total of what an AP clerk or what a manager actually needs to look at. And they only need to look at it when there's something blatantly wrong with their invoice. I think one of the biggest challenges that companies face in this space is you spend 6 months finding a system you want to purchase. You spend 3 months getting the thing deployed. You spend 3 months training a team to use it. And then you spend the rest of your life begging your vendors to use it. I think one of the biggest challenges that companies face in this space is you spend 6 months finding a system you want to purchase. You spend 3 months getting the thing deployed. You spend 3 months training a team to use it. And then you spend the rest of your life begging your vendors to use it. And one of the things that we figured out how to do was OpenEnvoy. None of the OpenEnvoy customers, vendors know who we are. It's completely transparent to the vendors. You get full AP matching and in-way, not just the three-way matching that you would like to set up. You get full in-way matching if you choose to adopt it, all the way clear through to your ERP, full straight through processing without your vendors even needing to be notified, much less approve whether or not the process is going to work. And there's just a couple of things that we do here. So we have a full vendor management list. When new vendors come in, we can actually generate them for our customers on the back end. That agent works on top of things like Ariba, Coupa, SAP, Oracle, down to like Rental Man, like specialty systems on the back end. When you adopt OpenEnvoy, you're getting fully structured financial data for both AP and AR, which means we can do all sorts of other value-added services. And the biggest feedback we get from our customers after their implementation is the CIO looks at it and says, oh, you're actually a better source of financial data than even our ERP, because our ERP was manipulated by people. And so we provide fully structured financial data, like I mentioned, to the BI tools, to other supply chain tools. OpenEnvoy really becomes like a resource, upstream resource for structured financial data. And if it's AP and AR at the same time, then we have all your banking data. And so if you have other AI tools that are coming on board and you don't want to start from scratch, because it's very painful to go through and say, okay, I want some team or I'm going to pay a consulting firm to label all of my data. You already have fully labeled data from OpenEnvoy. You can just simply take that and your start time on the new project immediately goes to 1 instead of starting from 0. So I believe that's really important. And that's the case for everything.
Here you're showing it looks like a vendor master creation screen. So is it so the vendor master data now is maintained in OpenEnvoy rather than an ERP system?
Synced. We actually full sync it. You can't abandon your ERP. We would tell you not to abandon your ERP, but it is fully synced between us and the ERP. We do a full two-way sync there.
So which one's the lead?
The ERP is always the lead for us unless a customer specifically requests the other way around. And then they specifically request the other way around when there are multiple ERPs that need data to be fed from OpenEnvoy.
In a multiple ERP system environment, I can see a case for that.
We always recommend that it's the customer's primary ERP, but you get a lot of organic growth when we're working with large customers, and you have to be able to deal with that organic growth. They might have 15 instances of SAP, but they might also have one QuickBooks instance that someone purchased a small consulting company from. It's a very common occurrence, and you have to normalize GL codes across those. So we support different orgs and keeping those separate with a master meta roll-up so that management can see a single view of spend across each one of those ERPs. It decreases the cost of diligence on those acquisitions. Remember, we're processing invoices in real time from an email inbox without human intervention, which means that we're actually seeing those day one of the acquisition instead of needing to wait 9 months until the systems are integrated. So you get a ton of efficiency gain out of using OpenEnvoy when you are acquiring other companies, because you can immediately see the spend from those other companies.
That's direct segue to what I wanted to start asking about is setup. Then if you're saying that, then you're kind of implying that like it's pretty easy to get up and running here.
So we typically recommend you budget 3 months on any AP automation tool when you have a large ERP and a large team. We're not spending those 3 months writing code or writing configuration. So this is the most important part. The change management component of OpenEnvoy is pretty significant because, as you can see, we're processing every single, this is our IDR. We have a built-in IDR. We're a big fan of the embedded IDR concept. IDRs do not need to be a separate product anymore. They can just be part of products now. So OpenEnvoy has a full IDR, and we're taking all this documentation. We're taking it in real time. There is no setup for us processing this documentation. You might have overriding setup in that you have specialty rules that need to be applied, like I mentioned, the cheddar cheese index or whatever earlier, right? Those types of things come up. Most AI companies sell sort of interesting opportunities. OpenEnvoy will generate you 8x of our cost within the first 12 months in free cash flow. You're very aggressive.
Did I get that right? An 8x ROI in 12 months.
For the AP product, absolutely. And the
Wow.
reason we can say that is because number one is we're going to find things that your team can't find today that humans
Mhm.
aren't even conditioned to try and find. It would take them hours and hours and hours belaboring on every single invoice if they wanted to find it. And so we do that for our larger customers. That is the guarantee that we provide. So when you think about setup time, what you're really trying to do with that setup is you're trying to figure out, okay, what are we doing today? Let's get that going. That usually takes 2 to 4 weeks. If you're a NetSuite customer, if you're an Oracle customer, an SAP customer, that's like 2 weeks. Step number 2 is what you would like to do, which is the next level of customization. And then what sort of labor trade is that? Like how many people actually need to be involved in the process? And
Wow.
so we're very direct
Okay.
about it. And we're very direct to our customers up front about it. Do not purchase this product if you're going to throw 300 people in a room and say you're AP clerks. That's not going to work. And so that's a very important thing that we say right off the bat.
So the integration piece. First, let me ask, do you do this with your own teams or do you contract with somebody to help you do integrations?
We do it with our own teams. We deploy core developers to that
Ah,
process.
okay. So the first step is to connect it.
Connections are
Okay.
very fast. The things that aren't fast are custom rules, specialty indexes, third-party data
Okay.
enrichment, things like
So
that.
customizations, most finance people are kind of familiar with that. And the more
Yep.
customizations you have, the more complex your environment is, and that comes at a cost. But that's the first step. The second step then is saying like, okay, now that we're connected, we can offload the entire AP process. But since it sounds like you recognize that like most customers aren't comfortable with that, the next step is saying like, okay, which ones do we want to take over first? So you don't need to jump off this cliff. You can kind of do it in
Most
more isolated segments.
That's correct. Most of the time, our customers focus regionally. So they say, let's do the US first, let's do
Uh-huh.
Europe second, let's do Mexico or LATAM third, and they kind of go
Mhm.
down the list, right? So that's how we onboard each one of those regions.
I just asked, let me just ask a couple questions there. So you could do it by region. Could I do it by business unit?
You can just throw all the vendors into the system and it will figure out which vendor looks like which. And
Okay.
so when you're starting, we do the email configuration within the first week. And so once we're doing that, you're already seeing which vendor is set up.
I'm just trying to
obviously.
get a feeling for how you can kind of, this is a big shift, right? This is a big transition for a lot of people. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like, it sounds like you're making some pretty big claims. Like you don't need people to be processing anything anymore or very little anymore.
Yeah.
I think people are going to be a little apprehensive to just like jump off that. So we can do it in a piecemeal approach, step by step.
That's right. And certainly you end up, especially if you have what one of our customers referred to as shadow AP. It's like you have a small AP department within the core finance group, maybe 2 to 4 people or whatever it is, but you're a multi-billion dollar business. So in reality, what's happened is you've distributed all the AP work that team should be doing to the business. And now the business is doing things like filling out GL codes. Even in large companies, this happens very frequently, right?
Yeah.
You're asked to submit an expense or an invoice, and you've got to figure out which GL code it belongs to. And it's a 16 character, mostly numerical string, and trying to figure it out. Everybody's been through that. Huge.
It's more than that. Like people, you have a shadow AP even when you outsource it, because what happens is like the outsourcing company now sends you an email to say, I don't know what this is. Tell me about this invoice. Which account should I use? Should I pay this? Whatever. It's like, well, why? So you're still doing AP work even when you outsource it. So
That's
anyway.
right. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to eliminate as much of that as fast as possible. And so what we generally rule of thumb is you take one AP leader per region, and then you prioritize working with that AP leader on every single region. And the executives really do have to figure out a transition plan because it's, 80% is a pretty sizable reduction in labor. And the automation rates that the system are giving, there's, classic AP automation, it's what they're tracking there is, can we capture the data? Can we map it to a purchase order? Right.
Mhm.
And that's how you get your AP automation straight through processing. When OpenEnvoy looked at it, as we said, well, what if automation actually meant no humans? Like what percentage could we do with no humans? And so now we run around 95% without humans, except in the case where there's some sort of fraudulent billing or overbilling or something like that, some exception they have to pay attention
Yeah, it's an exception-based handling. So it's not
That's
going to go to
exactly right.
zero. I mean, we're going to set the expectations. And I talk to my clients about this. And so I say, it's like, let's not expect this ever to be down to zero. It just, the people that'll be there will be doing different things.
You want it to go to high value add, whatever the percentages are, right?
Right.
So if you're getting overbilled 8, 10, 12% of the time, you want to see 8, 10 to 12% of the invoices. You don't want to see
That's
zero
right.
invoices, right? And so we want to make sure that those people, we normally recommend around 2 headcount per every billion in spend is roughly what we recommend.
Mhm.
At least not full time, but at least paying attention, right? So just to maintain standards and controls, really more than anything. And then that's less for media, right? It should be like 1 person for every couple billion in spend in media because the invoice sizes are larger versus manufacturing. The invoice ticket sizes are much smaller. They're in the
Right.
hundreds of thousands and not millions. So it's a little bit easier to maintain. But the nice thing is now we have completely decoupled the business's growth from its headcount requirements. The more the business grows, the more headcount you need.
Mhm.
That's exactly right. So when we
Mhm.
talk about, we're getting all this data into the system, we're matching, like I was showing you on the previous screen, then we're able to take you clear through to the payment workflow, which is now you have fully verified payments. Like every single invoice is fully verified that you do need to pay it on a specific date or within a specific time range or whatever it may be for that vendor or whatever it is. We can take you clear through to the payable itself, which is instead of routing it to your ERP, which then produces a master file, which then you manually upload to your bank, which then you basically find out if your bank paid it, just like the classic AP workflow. Now the system can automatically route ACH to wire, fast ACH to batch payments, D card, right? All those things can be completely automated now. Updates the reconciliation on the bank side, updates your vendor, sends out a payment notification. All that is now completely handled for far less work. The pieces of feedback we always get is, but it only takes my team like 30 minutes a week to do the payments. And then you look at it from an AP perspective. It's like, no, it's taking a lot of time because they're not sure if to pay the right amount. They're always asking whether or not the payment went through. They're getting questions from vendors like, when am I going to get paid? So
The
now
payment,
all that's fully automatic.
the payment part, it's usually like click, 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 but it's
That's right.
all the work that goes into that. That's the hard part. But so
Correct.
you're saying that the payments are also handled through OpenEnvoy. So they don't have to be routed somewhere else. And again, just thinking about like the system of record, all of that data then is interfaced back to the ERP system. And
That's
then
correct. Yeah.
so that like when it comes to an AP thing, and I'm thinking now about the auditing process, it's like it's pretty self-contained in here. While the balances the auditor might like find the balances that they want to audit out of the ERP system, the fully contained set of like audit response data comes out of OpenEnvoy.
That's exactly right.
So you don't have to bounce between a bunch of different systems to go chase what happened. It's all contained in one place.
All in a single view, especially across ERP, across bank accounts. So now all of that takes place right here. So now classically, you would go to a billing third party, or you would go to someone to make sure your invoices are correct, or you go to a company that just handles cross-border as an example. You would go to a separate company that does like freight audit and pay for you. Now, all of those are completely streamlined into a single system, and you don't think about 90% of the work. You never even see it. So now what you're doing is you're getting efficiencies out of batch payments automatically. You're getting efficiency out of wire. You're getting efficiency out of foreign nostro deployment allocation. All of that, because all of those payments are now completely verified before it ever gets to this point, and then it gets routed appropriately to the right channels. And
so it's like it's tip to tail. It's the whole process here on the whole AP flow. It's being handled.
And we've taken all of those third-party style audit firms and we've converted them into just another AP process instead of having all this complexity being managed by third-party firms.
Well, I mean, you addressed a lot of the questions that I have. I mean, as far as like, looking at this from like selecting a vendor perspective, like some of the big things, there's obviously like another level of detail, right? Trying to match your processes, identifying where you have like those exception type processes. It becomes up to the business to decide, do I need to keep that process? Should I change the process and so forth? Which is part of the implementation effort. Do you have any other things that you can share that would be worthwhile?
I think one of the things that's always worthwhile talking about is how can you get data out of the system? And so we touched upon it a little bit earlier. which is
Yeah.
full API level access to every single component of the system, full reporting capabilities, performance, vendor accuracy, and things like that. The thing that I would stress for a lot of customers is once data like this goes into a financial institute system, it is rarely taken again by the procurement team for their future negotiations. So one thing that's really exciting for OpenEnvoy customers is we understand how accurate the vendors are. We track all those over time. You can store that information up and use that during your next procurement cycle. And so it really becomes not just a tool for, you know, efficiency within the finance team or great data for the IT team, great data for the supply chain team. It becomes very material data that's used by our customers' procurement teams to get efficiencies in the market.
Makes, when you're negotiating discounts, it makes a lot of
Especially.
sense. So I'm FinanceNext, finance-next.com. I generally help like CFOs and their teams implement AI, selecting vendors, deciding which processes to start with, how to do it responsibly, how to move forward, and start a modern finance organization.
Well, you've been a great help to us and me personally over the years, so I definitely appreciate your partnership. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We'll be in touch.
Cheers. So here's what we did is we built our own pipelines at GPU levels. And so we built it into bare metal. So our team is all ex-NVIDIA, ex-Qualcomm. And so we don't use third party. We don't use the libraries that people are used to using for those things, which is why we can get the efficiency. It's actually
Oh,
why that speed exists. And so what you look at when you look at these big companies like OpenAI and guys like that, you're looking at the cost of inference that blows up
yeah,
their costs. The cost
yeah.
of training is actually fairly low. And we figured out how to do the training without humans in the loop.